During the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Mexican-American Youth Organization, MAYO, encountered a lot of racism, discrimination, and segregation from the Anglo community. They explored a lot of ideas on how to protest their needs. They used the idea of boycotting and striking in schools. They exchanged a lot of ideas in between other organizations and other activists when they went around Texas. When the U.S. acquired about a third of Mexican territory in 1848, a lot of people who were living in Mexico before this war stayed there. When the Mexican Revolution happened, a big wave of immigrants were fleeing the outcomes of that revolution, poverty and death. That's when all of the discrimination towards the Mexican Americans started to happen, since they made over half of the population during this time. They got discriminated in schools, jobs, and public places. Most of the time they were segregated as well. Mexican Americans during this time were experiencing similar things as African Americans. There were places where only Anglo-Americans could attend and no Mexicans. The curriculum of the schools was imbalanced. The teachers thought that the kids should only speak English because most didn't know how to speak it. A lot of the rules they had violated their student rights. Some of the rules they had was the English only, no Spanish rule. If they got caught speaking Spanish, they would have needed to pay a fine, a penny for every Spanish word they said. Also, they would need to stand on a black square or were forced to write, "I must not speak Spanish," over and over again. The outcomes of segregation, discrimination, and racism in schools, jobs, and other public areas resulted of strikes and organizations led by Mexican Americans who called themselves Chicanos. In 1929, before the Chicano movement, the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, was formed. LULAC was trying to solve political disenfranchisement and racial discrimination. It also tried to solve poverty problems among Mexican Americans. One major activist that was well known was Cesar Chavez. He was a founder of the National Farm Workers Association formed in 1962 in California. The most famous act that Cesar Chavez organized was the Delano Grape Strike, lasting from 1965 through 1970. The goal was to overthrow the system where people treated farm workers as if they were unimportant human beings. There were lots more of organizations like this around this time. They had one thing in common. It was to defend the rights of Mexican Americans. As of 1963, there was a revolt in Crystal City, Texas. It was led by Juan Cornejo, member of PASO. PASO stands for Political Association of Spanish-Speaking Organization. PASO was formed in the early 1960s as an outgrowth of the success of the Viva Kennedy clubs. Its main principles called for the enactment of social and economic measures for the advancement of Mexican Americans. As a result of the 1963 revolt, there were electoral elections and PASO formed a new political party and ran for city government and won. PASO succeeded because it was able to get more Mexican Americans to pay the poll tax and vote. In previous elections, Mexican Americans only made 10 to 15% of the voters' registration in Crystal City when they made up 85% of the Crystal City community. There was success to the 1963 revolt. For instance, there was less discrimination towards Mexican Americans, and there was an increasing percent of Mexican American high school graduates. It also helped pass Title VI and VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is a federal law explaining that it prohibits employers from discriminating employees on basis of sex, race, color, and national origin and/or religion. In the mid-1960s, there had been major civil rights legislation passed, but the discrimination was still going on. The school rule of only English, no Spanish, kept frustrating the Mexican American students.
We started noticing the discrimination that was here in our campus that us students had to go through. There are things that you can do to break the school rules, but yet those school rules were not right and were not proper or were not or they were violating our rights as students. So we started saying, hey, what else do they have written down that they're violating our rights?
It was until 1967 when some college students from San Antonio, Texas were frustrated and decided to form the Mexican American Youth Organization, or MAYO. MAYO was founded by Los Cinco. They were Jose Ángel Gutiérrez, Willie Velázquez, Mario Compeán, Ignacio Pérez, and Juan Patlan. They knew that the legislation passed by the government wasn't going to be enforced by the people of Texas and other parts. They formed MAYO because they felt that organizations like LULAC weren't doing enough to achieve their goals, which is why MAYO decided to use militant tactics because they believed that they could achieve more using these tactics. MAYO claimed that Mexican Americans had three major needs: economic independence, local control of education, and political strength. This was because during this time, many Mexican Americans were facing discrimination, racism, and segregation. To fight for their cause, they organized strikes, boycotts, and school walkouts with college students and high school students to protest inequality in schools. The strategies that worked well were the school walkouts and the boycotts they organized. The reason for this is that it affected the school budget. The school budget depended on how many students were there at a school. The more students there were, the more money they got. Mexican Americans made up the majority of the school's population. Not coming back to school was a threat to the schools because it affected the schools in a financial way. The most famous event they did was the 1969 Crystal City walkout. It started off with Mexican American girls going to the school board and demanding that more Mexican American girls should be able to join the cheerleading group. Out of the 4 girls in the cheerleading group, only 1 could be a Mexican American girl. The school board really didn't do anything, so they sought help from MAYO. MAYO organized a school walkout. There were going to be high school student leaders who were going to present speeches and more. Finally, on December 8, 1969, the walkout took place. A lot of students had attended with their parents as well. Their goals were to have more Mexican American staff in the schools. They wanted to have a bilingual and bicultural education starting from elementary all the way to secondary level. They wanted a student representative in the school board. Students also wanted to be treated fairly in the school. Another goal they had was being able to participate in school activities like cheerleading. The walkout continued until January 6, 1970. In January 1970, the school partially met the students' demands. Most of its goals were fulfilled within the next 2 years. After the 1969 Crystal City walkout, the leaders of MAYO decided to form a political party. It was La Raza Unida Party. Its main goals were to bring greater economic, social, and political self-determination to Mexican Americans in the state of Texas. The goals were mainly based upon MAYO's goals since MAYO and La Raza Unida Party were both formed by the same people. They got control of the local government. They also got more Mexican Americans to vote. By June 3, 1973, Governor Dolph Briscoe from Texas signed the Bilingual Training Act. It was a historic point in education for Mexican Americans because they have been fighting for this to happen for a long time. The Bilingual Act mandated that all Texas elementary public schools enrolling 20 or more children limited to speaking English in a given grade must be provided a bilingual education. Therefore, the schools needed to hire more Mexican American teachers. In the year of 1981, there was a mayoral election in San Antonio, Texas. Henry Cisneros decided to run for mayor of San Antonio. Since a lot of Mexicans were now more politically active, they voted for him and Henry won. Henry became the first Hispanic mayor of a major U.S. city. In conclusion, MAYO explored new ideas to meet their needs. They also encountered a lot of discrimination and racism. Finally, they exchanged ideas in between other organizations and activists.